Sorry about that. I apologize to everybody. Steph, nice warm up. Now do it again.
Are you kidding? Thank you very much for that dress rehearsal.
Unfortunately, I'm not kidding. I apologize to everybody. Please go ahead.
So my name is Steph Routh. I'm with the Fix Our Streets campaign. I'm also the former executive director of Oregon Walks and a born and raised East Portlander. The Fix Our Streets measure that is before us in May is a renewal of gas tax, so it does not increase taxes. It is just like maintaining a home or car, basic maintenance of streets is much less expensive than ignoring problems until things completely break down. We have about 30 years of maintenance and backlog to deal with in Portland, and so the last 4 years has been a great down payment on an investment for the future of Portland. So by the end of 2020, the Bureau of Transportation, using the Fix Our Streets funding from the first round, will fully repave 40 lane miles of city streets, fix over 400 sections of failing road, connecting miles of sidewalk in East Portland, which as an East Portlander, I can tell you, is sorely needed, and making another 170 safety improvements in our system. So the next 4 years the Fix Our Streets 2 has a similar robust, very prescribed project list that was developed over the course of years, talking with hundreds of Portlanders through events, and yeah, it'll be a significant down payment again, getting through our maintenance and street repair backlog. And I'll just say also, current endorsers, we have a broad coalition of endorsers who have been involved in the development of this, that include Northwest Oregon Labor Council, AARP Oregon, Professional Business Development Group, Verde, Business for a Better Portland, Portland Business Alliance, and the list goes on.
Great, thank you. Eric, would you like to make the case against it, please? And introduce yourself to start. Thank you. Eric, you're muted, I think. Eric, you're still muted.
There we go. Like you said, it's amateur hour. Yeah, I'm Eric Fruits, and I'm the Vice President of Research at Cascade Policy Institute. And I also served as the research board member overseeing the City Club's report that came out a few years ago regarding the Fix Our Streets program. If you go back, remember this all came out of the street fee debacle, and we ended up instead with a gas tax that is now up for renewal. And really between the first gas tax and the renewal, nothing much has really changed. As with the last measure, Measure 26209 promises just enough money for street paving and maintenance so that supporters can claim that more than half of the money will be spent on street repairs. And by the way, more than half means 51% in this case. As with the last measure, while the dollars look big, the results are really kind of minuscule. For example, if you look at the street paving projects, they promise an eye-popping $25 million in spending on street paving. But when you look at the actual projects promised and map out the miles, that adds up to about 7.5 miles of city streets. And that could be anywhere from 15 to 30 lane miles when we're done. Now, remember, this is a city that has a road paving backlog of about 3,000 miles. Another thing is that if you look at a fundamental principle of public finance, is that there should be a nexus between the charge that's imposed and the service or benefit that's being provided. So, for example, a gas tax that's paid by drivers, then the funds should be used and spent to benefit drivers. But if you look at the breakdown of the spending on Measure 26209, you'll see that many of the projects are designed to increase congestion and to make things worse for drivers. You've got about $4.5 million for neighborhood greenways that are designed to impose burdens on auto drivers. You've got $1.5 million for all what we call the slow motion plans: Northwest slow motion, North Portland slow motion, Southwest slow motion. All of these are designed to make driving a car more costly. Then you got $2 million allocated for speed bumps. all carefully crafted to slow you down and to tear up your car's front end, as I can attest to. So Portlanders voting for Measure 2629 will not be voting for roadway improvements. They'll actually be voting to underwrite programs that will make their commutes measurably worse. And so that's why I'm recommending that voters reject this and come back with a better plan.
Great, thank you. I'd like somebody on the pro side to respond to the city audit in May 2019, which I'm going to paraphrase and summarize. Basically, found that projects started late, were over budget, and that there was very little accountability in terms of the annual audits that were promised last time and were not done, and that the city did a terrible job of making sure that heavy truck owners paid their fair share as they had promised to make them do. So somebody please help us understand why we should renew a measure when the city audit was so scathingly negative. Thanks.
Well, Noah's here not to argue why we should renew it, but he can address the Bureau's response to the audit, but then Jennifer can piggyback on that piece.
Sure. So I don't know if I would characterize the audit as scathingly negative, but I thought it was, it came in about 1.5 years into the program, and actually considered it a very constructive audit, and we've had good follow-up with the auditor's office. So the couple of the findings were that the projects were behind schedule and delivery. That was true. It was a brand new collection program, and the projects, there was a serious amount of project development and scoping that needed to be done to get going on a brand new Fixing Our Streets program. I will say that development has already begun should voters decide to approve another round of projects. So those delays, so that was an adjustment in response to the audit. Since that time, in response to the audit, PBOT really overhauled its entire project delivery process, not just for Fixing Our Streets, but for all projects, acquired new project management software, reorganized the project delivery system, and all the Fixing Our Streets projects will be underway within the 4-year period of the gas tax. So responded quickly, and I think appropriately, to the audit finding on that. In terms of the oversight, we tightened up reporting with the oversight committee, made sure that they were involved in all finance decisions and the annual reporting on it, and then clarified the auditing prescription in the voter approved measure, which said it needed to be audited annually. And just to avoid any misunderstandings around that, we contracted with Moss Adams, an independent audit firm, to do annual financial audits for Fixing Our Streets, and that model has become a best practice citywide. We partnered with the auditor's office to develop an ongoing contract for all voter approved measures to do financial audits through that. So really was a constructive audit for us, improved the Fixing Our Streets program, and benefited the city as a whole.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer.
I'm sorry. I got to pipe in here. No, with all due respect, you're mischaracterizing the audit. Scathing is really an accurate term. And I guess the question is, I suppose we can take your word for it that you've made all these mid-course corrections. Why did it get to that point to begin with? Why was the city unable to manage this in a way that actually ends up providing subsidies to heavy vehicles because you weren't collecting the revenue? You were over budget and you didn't follow through on your commitments. I mean, and frankly, it strikes me that you're taking somewhat lightly what strikes me as very substantial and legitimate criticism of a city effort by an agency that ought to know better.
I think, Jennifer, it's true that I didn't respond to the heavy vehicle use tax piece. I apologize for that. So I think Jennifer may want to jump in on that. I don't, Mark, I just from a factual perspective, without regard to Fixing Our Streets too, I just would respond that we took the audit extremely seriously. It was an audit that came in really a year one audit in a 4-year program. And I think we were slow to get up and running when you do a brand new revenue, when we did the revenue collection setup, I think we said, we'll do these projects on this schedule. I think it was overly ambitious because we hadn't done it before, and we did double down and basically are on schedule and on budget now. So I took it very seriously, especially the transparency and reporting pieces of it to the Oversight Committee. Jennifer can respond to that. The heavy vehicle use tax is a separate issue and very important. So I could speak to it, but Jennifer, if you want to jump in, that's fine.
Sure, and I just would also reiterate the point that Noah just made about the program being brand new. I was disappointed in the audit when I read it, and I take some responsibility for that. I chaired the committee from the start, and it was the first time I had done that. But like Noah just said, it was really an aggressive schedule, and I don't think that it was totally realistic. Maybe that was because the election schedule doesn't correlate with the construction schedule. But the Oversight Committee had to hit the ground running at the very first meeting. We were asked to start weighing in on projects because that was how the deadlines lined up. We had to make some decisions to meet the summer construction and the bidding cycle. So I think it's unrealistic for this brand new program to have met all of those deadlines. And the fact that it's caught up now is a credit to PBOT. But I would love to talk about the heavy vehicle use tax. It is an ongoing source of frustration to me. But I can certainly explain how we got where we are with the correlation this year, or in this cycle. The heavy vehicle use tax was a sort of companion program that was supposed to address the fact that there's really only one truck stop in Portland, and they didn't want to be bypassed by truckers coming through by having to tax their product when someone could drive a few miles and fill up their big rig somewhere else. But the goal was really to kind of keep the cost responsibility in an appropriate place. And the freight community agreed to the program, and it was tied to the business license tax in Portland. And what we found when it was starting to be collected, as Noah alluded, months into the program, just because of the way the taxing cycle works, it turned out that those there were more people were asking for exemptions for good reasons. They drive less than a mile on Portland streets, but that put the burden on a very small number of companies, and they objected, and I disagreed with them, and we debated a lot in the committee, and where we came down was that there was not the political will to increase the tax on that handful of companies. So the Fixing Our Streets Oversight Committee went along with the caveat that the projects that the freight community wanted would be the ones that were affected by the change in funding. But I think we made a really strong case that the Oregon Constitution at the state level requires parity between the vehicle causing the damage and the vehicle paying. And I think going forward, the city has embraced that idea, even though they're not required to. And my understanding, and Noah, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that there is a slightly higher companion heavy vehicle use tax going forward, but it's linked to the passage of the Fixing Our Streets. Is that right?
The last part is not technically correct. They're legally separate. The heavy vehicle use tax is approved by council vote and was approved prior to this measure. So they're not linked in any legal way, but they're linked in purpose. So that would be a council decision ultimately whether to continue forward under all circumstances. And I would just add, from a technical perspective, the heavy vehicle use tax as a way to carry forward the principle of cost responsibility for the streets, you know, it's quite a unique and special thing in Oregon that we require this, and so it was innovative and inexact in its estimates. So the first round of collection needed to be adjusted, and so we referred that back to council. They've adjusted the rate to maintain cost responsibility for heavy vehicles and personal vehicles, smaller vehicles going forward.
Great, thank you. Could I just again ask everybody who's not speaking to stay muted? We're getting a tremendous amount of background noise on this call. Mark, go ahead.
And I think Jeff has joined us as well.
Mark Sussman, you wanted to ask a question?
I don't want to be annoying about this, and I don't want to push it too much longer. But Jennifer, what I heard you said is that deadlines were set that were unreasonable. Is that correct?
I think it was aggressive, and
yeah. Okay. Who set the deadlines?
I'll just jump. I mean, so the voter approved list didn't have any deadlines in it. It just said these will be done in the 4 years of the program. PBOT then laid out a schedule which we did not meet in the first year.
Right. And you talk about this being a new program. PBOT's not a new agency.
No, but it was a significant scaling up of the project, the amount of projects that we did, and we were off the schedule. And I'm not going to argue that point.
I get. So look, I'll leave this. I guess at some point, and with all due respect to Eric, I think he's wrong in a good deal of his analysis. But at a certain point, when do good intentions they're just not enough? You know, for all of you. So let's not argue the merits of raising money off gas taxes, particularly at a time when gas is low and spending it on streets. But at a certain point, when do the individuals who are responsible for honoring their covenant with voters, when do we say, I'm sorry, it's enough? You were over budget, and you sold this in part that you were going to go after business and heavy vehicles, and you haven't been able to successfully do that. So maybe that's a rhetorical statement. It doesn't require comment, and I don't want to dominate the time, but
I don't want to be rhetorical, Mark. I just will say that if you go back and look at the promise to voters from a delivery perspective, PBOT will deliver all the projects, is not over budget, and is collecting the heavy vehicle use tax, and council adjusted it to maintain cost responsibility. So and there was nothing in the audit that says that we've reached trust with the voters whatsoever. So if you go back and look at the commitments made, we were slow in delivering, and we adjusted, and we've delivered. And I think I've actually co-presented with the auditor on several occasions, and she acknowledges all those things that I just said. So, I'll leave it at that.
There are
if
also
I can respond just really quickly.
Jeff can speak to this, where PBOT has over-delivered on the promises. You know, one was the commitment to deliver 20% of contracted dollars to COVID firms, and that was doubled. When council referred this in February, there was actually quite a bit of testimony lauding some of the great work that council or that PBOT has done to make sure the dollars get out to firms that are local, small firms that could really use those dollars. And I know Jeff has joined us on the call too. I think he could speak to that point, but it looks like somebody else wanted to jump in with a question, or Jennifer wanted to jump in.
I just wanted to respond to the rhetorical question too, and say that, and it's really important to me because part of the biggest takeaway from the City Club's research that led to this was that voters really did feel mistrustful, and there have been lots of promises made about raising funds for streets. And that was a key component of this, that these funds have to be used for these projects, and those projects are going to be complete. So if there's one takeaway from this today, is that I really feel like that commitment has been met, and it's not the way that Mark characterized it.
Well,
if you take the program as a whole.
I take issue with the projects themselves, because it seems to me that if you ask people what do they want, one of their number one complaints is about congestion and commuting times, and they have worsened over the years. Over the past 5 years, commute times increased by about 12%. That's a lot. That's days out of the year that are now wasted sitting in traffic. And when you say we're going to have a gas tax and we're going to improve our roads, you expect to say, wow, maybe my commute won't get faster, but it certainly won't get slower. And if you look at these projects, many of these projects are actually designed to make people go slower, to make commutes longer, to make it more painful for people to get from one place to the other.
But Eric, I don't think that was the promise of the measure. As I recall, the promise of the measure was they were going to pave the roads, which we can judge on the merits of whether or not they're paving the roads at the speed that they ought to be. But who gives a damn whether your commute is faster or not? That's got nothing to do with this measure.
Well, no, actually it does, because if you look, only half the money was spent was earmarked for paving the roads.
The rest was to make sure people don't get hit by cars and die.
That's another part of it, right? You have things like you have the greenways, you have the speed bumps. I'm not too opposed to, say, improving sidewalks, because I think sidewalk safety ends up being street safety. PBOT's job should be to move people safely and quickly from place to place. And I think they're doing so, and well, anywhere from fair to poor, actually, on the safety part, if you look at the traffic fatality numbers. But on the speed part of it, actually improving the transportation system so people can get around, they've completely failed. And I don't see why we should pay more money in order to make our commutes worse.
Well, my commute's better, actually.
Well, mine is too. I work in my basement.
So I'd like to ask the proponents of the measure a kind of a fairness question. This is a gas tax. It's extremely regressive. And the project description leads me to believe that this is basically just augmenting the PBOT's existing funding stream. This looks very much like general fund money because it's being used for a variety of different projects. So instead of using this mechanism, why not increase the price of parking at the city parking lots as part or all of the money that this would raise? Because this falls on the poorest people in our community, whereas the people who park downtown in city parking structures or on city streets are not the poorest among us. So please justify the mechanism. Thank you.
Jennifer, I see that you're doing what so many of us do these days, and Mom, while doing this, Nigel is asking about a variety of different mechanisms, and I know in your early work, that's certainly something that happened, is looked at different mechanisms as options. If you wanted to speak to that a bit, why, for example, raising the cost of parking is not what we're proposing here.
Sure. We looked at all kinds of different funding mechanisms, and parking was something that we considered. But when you come down to it, the bottom line is that the gas tax has the benefit of being something that's known. There's already a collection mechanism. The city doesn't have to do anything to be able to collect that tax. It comes from ODOT. It's related to the use of the streets. And there's just not something that we tried a street fee. You saw how popular that was. That wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't the committee's first choice, but it's a low-hanging fruit, something that can be accomplished. And we just felt that it was the least bad option that there was to raise some funding. We hoped that by the choice of projects that would offset some of the regressive nature, the idea was to benefit some of the communities that have been most neglected. And I think that's reflected in the projects. But, behind the scenes, I think that, PBOT and ODOT and hopefully the federal transportation folks are, coming up with other ideas, because the gas tax is dying, and it should. But right now, it's a way to get some money to do some repairs and take care of some neglect, because the longer it goes on, the more it costs. It was really a compromise, and I can't make a great case for it. It's not a super taxing mechanism, but it's something that's available. It's not expensive to administer, and it's quick and gonna, put a finger in the dike.
Okay. Can I ask an overly simple question? I think this is to you, Noah, because you're the representative from PBOT. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm the
okay. So this is one of those, Columbo stupid questions. Why does PBOT need this money? Why don't you have the resources to fix these streets without an additional gas tax?
Yeah, sure. Big picture, the federal and state gas taxes, I think Jennifer did a good job of explaining that the way that we built our roads over the years didn't factor in the life cycle costs of maintaining those roads. We have a lot of roads. The federal and state gas taxes that come down to us through formula funding are not pegged to inflation. The federal gas tax hasn't been increased since the early 90s. We did get one bump in 2017 from the legislature, but that doesn't even keep pace with the inflationary cost of maintaining the roads, much less getting ahead of the asset life cycle cost of them degrading. So we're really, decades behind, as Jennifer pointed out, in maintaining this. So we do the best we can to prioritize the roads that are most critical in our neighborhoods and in our most heavily used arterial corridors. But the reason, roads price tag is to rebuild them. So we're really putting the value with additional incremental gas tax into saving city money by all the detention of the act, by getting in there and doing earlier. And so we're trying to tip the curve for the long run, but we have decades of neglect. It's just city, it's across the country.
No, I'm
Mark,
probably an unfair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just real quickly, I don't want to be flippant, but one reason why they don't have enough money is because they leverage the parking garage revenues to issue revenue bonds to build the streetcar, and the city spends $15 million subsidizing the operations of the streetcar. If the streetcar is such a valuable piece of public transportation, they should sell it off to TriMet and be done with it, so that the city itself isn't subsidizing it.
Could I break in here for just a moment? This is Steph. It seems Jeff has been muted and would love to speak at some point and isn't able to do so. Anyone have a thought?
Jeff, just hit Control D on your computer, Jeff, and that should allow you to speak.
Phone called in, so I wonder if somebody, maybe Nigel, if you click on his number in the sidebar, it can be unmuted. Jeff, I bet if you try dialing back in, once you pop back in, you would be unmuted.
While we're waiting for Jeff to dial back in, I would like one of the proponents to address Eric's criticism that only about half of the money, or just over half of the money, will go to what people would normally recognize as street repair projects. There are a variety of other projects that are not directly repairs in the program. So could somebody explain that, please?
I can take a stab at it. And this actually goes to one of the other things I believe we learned in the audit, which was, that safety and maintenance, like what is safety and what is maintenance, is a tricky thing, because a lot of maintenance projects also have safety components and vice versa. So I think a lot of the audit, a lot of the projects that we're looking at for Fix Our Streets 2 were identified on the matrix of safety, equity, and pavement condition. So so there's that nexus there.
Can anybody hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, Jeff. Hi, Jeff. We can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I've been listening to a lot. It's a lot going on here. So I just wanted to chime in because there's a couple things, that, especially the things that you just said about the safety improvements that are necessary for fixing our streets, and the way the city has actually handled that, and the fact that they have met the equity requirements in a way that has kind of exceeded all the expectations that we have had as the minority contracting community, and I think are huge, and I don't think they need to be downplayed. In terms of improving the speed in terms of the commute, at least as my understanding, I don't think that was ever the desire. It's very similar to the Division Transit project we're working on and all the safety improvements that we're doing, trying to keep, our public and to keep pedestrians and keep cars safe on the road. I think that takes precedence over commute speeds and convenience, is to keep our people safe. So I just wanted to, state that, but I'm glad you can hear me now. So I'll chime in when I hear some things. Also, one of the things that I think needs to be stated is that a lot of the designs associated with the ADA requirements were very difficult, and that kind of delayed projects a lot starting out on the fixing our streets. And we've done several of the projects as Raymore Construction. And there was a lot of confusion in terms of meeting the ADA requirements that had to be worked out. And some of the limits had to be altered to make that happen. And I think the city's also done a good job in working around that as well. So this is one of the areas that I actually have been happy with the city. A lot of areas I haven't been, but this is one area that I've actually been happy with what the city has done.
Tell us some of the areas that you have been unhappy with what the city has done, please, Jeff.
It's a lot that goes way back. The city's been working diligently in terms of equity and inclusion and some of the things that they have not done a good job historically on. They've taken a stance of doing more restorative justice in the way that they procure capital projects and infrastructure projects. And so I think they've done a much better job, but we still got a long way to go.
Okay, thank you.
Can I jump in
Sure.
onto that? Thank you, Jeff. And I'm so glad we can hear you now. It was a long road. But I think also to the safety component, and I think Jeff touched on this, is the concentration of pedestrian projects and that nexus with maintenance, and that we have over half of these projects for Fix Our Streets 2 that are out in East Portland. And as I mentioned, I grew up there. And I live there now, and so we see a higher concentration of fatalities in East Portland, and that contributes to why there are so many crossings, why street lighting is a huge component. It's $4.5 million to get street lighting on our major collectors and arterials, particularly in East Portland, that has been needed for a long time. You could say that base repair, pothole repair are primarily maintenance, but anyone who has, had a wheel sucked into a pothole or has turned their heel on a bad piece of road sees that that's also safety. So I think that goes to, and then you look at ADA curb ramps that are, a lot of that is part and parcel with a maintenance project, but it has a safety component as well for our most vulnerable road users.
Great, thank you. Noah, I know you're here on a purely factual basis, and I want to be careful not to pull you into taking a position here, but it's obvious with the COVID-19 pandemic that PBOT's budget is going to get completely destroyed because so few people are driving or parking. So how do we know that if this measure passes, you don't just take this money and backfill other PBOT operations?
Yeah, and you're right. It's the revenue implications are serious. And you didn't ask, but I will say that, obviously this is a gas tax and people aren't driving as much right now, so our revenue projections are down. We are very conservative with our revenue projections, but there's no way we could have anticipated this. So we're working with the oversight committee and their purview is to look at any project adjustments we have to do based on budget. So I just want to be upfront about that. It's pretty insane right now. So, but I will say that going forward, gas taxes are a more inelastic source of revenue. They may be down, but they don't disappear in the way that other sources can in a recession. So while we may have some reduced revenue in the proposed measure that council referred, I think it'll still be relatively within the frame of projects that we put forward. On the question that you asked, basically these projects and this workforce is not baked in, is not part of the base budget of PBOT. If the measure passes, we do them. If the measure doesn't pass, we don't. And the dollars are specifically tied by project and specific program category to the workforce that's associated with that and the contracts that are associated with that. So there's no backfilling. It's a pretty strict line between the two.
I'm curious what the triaging will be if the revenues come in below, right? So you're projecting 75 million. Let's say you bring in only 60. Do all the paving projects get cut? Do the speed bumps get cut? How do when voters are out there and they're saying, okay, well, gee, they're not going to bring as much money as they want. Hopefully they'll spend it all on fixing our streets and paving the roads, but will it go to something else? And will it go, which of those projects are the most important?
I mean, that's why we have a citizen oversight committee that refers to council. We bring our financial records to the oversight committee meeting at the every 3 months. We send them every month. We present any changes that need to be considered and offer them options that are consistent with what the voters approved. So we really rely on that oversight committee to keep us accountable and direct us on any changes in the project list.
Can I just jump in and say a couple words about the Oversight Committee? It's a really interesting group of people, and it's targeted to have representatives from different areas of the city and different priorities. There are people in the freight community. There are people like me who drive everywhere. There are people from organizations that promote walking. So it's really a representative group, and we have hours-long meetings and deliberations. And every time that I've gone to council, I have been well received, and my opinions have held a lot of weight and have been taken really seriously. So I actually, in spite of the rough start, and I'm not blowing off the audit, but I think that it's a pretty fair and good mechanism to make sure that the funds that come in, if they are diminished, are used in an appropriate way that addresses the needs of all different communities around Portland.
Mark or Aaron, do you have any further questions for our group here?
No.
Okay, I'd just like to ask each side.
Sorry, no, I have no questions.
I'd like to ask each side to give us a very quick 1 or so minute wrap up. Why we should pass it or why we should not pass it. Let's again, since the proponents are asking for money, let's have them go first. Just give us a real quick summary. Hit anything that you haven't hit and make it quick. Thank you.
Since Jeff was unable to make it for the first part, I wonder if, Jeff, you would talk about what this measure means to you and what you see in terms of, as a business owner, recovery.
I think the measure, means, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
The measure, not significant just to Raymore, but to the whole minority contracting community, especially considering that the city has been able to hit 40% on these projects. So I think it's huge, especially you talk about COVID and we talk about the impact that it's had on us, and we're just surviving now, but we're going to need revenue to come out of this whole COVID epidemic. We're going to need put people back to work right away. And this is significant in that these jobs are simple enough that allows us to employ a wide range of people. And Raymore, for example, is a company that 70% of all our employees are people of color. And we just see this as a significant deal. And a lot of the work is in East Portland, which a lot of our people reside in. So we see this measure as very critical for the future for us as well.
Great, thank you. Eric, you want to close it out?
Sure. I mean, it may sound strange coming from someone like me at Cascade Policy Institute, but I'm really not opposed to taxes. In fact, I think a gas tax could be an appropriate revenue mechanism. But the problem with this gas tax is just simply that there's not a nexus between the people who are paying and the people who are receiving the benefits. And there should be. The Oregon Constitution mandates that these things should be put to street and road improvements. And I know that that's fairly flexible under Supreme Court guidance. But regardless, just as in terms of good government being about services delivered, this doesn't really deliver the services that Portlanders expect. And I think they would be willing to pay for a 10-cent gas tax if they knew that it was going to be used to actually improve the roads, and this doesn't.
Thank you all very much for taking the time today. I apologize again for my failure to turn the recorder on immediately at the beginning. I'm sure I'll be chastised severely for that later.
I'm grateful.
Great. Well, thanks all to all of you for participating. Aaron and Mark, if you could stay on, if everybody else could jump out, that would be great.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.